All right, good afternoon. I'm W. Robert Schutz III. You can simply call me Robert. I'm happy to be here. I'm on staff at Active Transportation Alliance, where we work on walking because everyone's a pedestrian, biking because it's fun to do, and we also advocate for public transportation because it's essential. At Active Trans, I'm a campaign organizer, and I'm also active with the Transportation Equity Network, which lifts the voices of Black and Brown, South and West Side communities in the transit sphere. I'm very happy to be here because it's important to have this discussion. We're at a very opportune time here in Illinois where we have a chance to really improve our public transportation system and also make a connection with housing. That's why we have talk about ETOD today. And it's, I know it's very important for people, and I've seen what it can do. I used to live in Logan Square. I do live in Belmont-Cragen that's not as rich with transit, but Logan Square was blessed with the Lucy Parsons apartment right across the street from the Blue Line, and I think that's a good example of ETOD. We have here on my panelists today that are going to talk about the connections between public transportation and ETOD. To my right, we have Representative Eva-Dina Delgado. Further to my right, we have longtime activist Jacky Grimshaw. She's a real blessing to our community. And then to Jacky's right, we have interim president of the CTA, Nora Leerhsen, and we're pleased to have her here. So we'll be talking for about an hour. There'll be some time for questions near the end, both from the audience. And to get ourselves started, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, take a few sentences to tell them about what they're thinking or feeling about this pivotal moment. And they're going to talk a little bit about the fiscal cliff and the opportunities ahead of us. So I don't want to detract anymore from their time. So I have a question for you again. I want you to introduce yourselves briefly and think about what you're feeling about this pivotal moment and what's at stake. And so maybe I'll defer to the state representative. If I lived a half block away, she'd be my rep.
That's the story of my district. Everybody's just outside it. My name is Eva-Dina Delgado, state representative of the 3rd District. I've been serving since 2019. The 3rd District includes neighborhoods such as Wicker Park, Humboldt Park, Logan Square, Hermosa, Belmont-Cragen, Montclair, and I have a tiny little piece of Dunning. So I have a city-centered district, and transit is incredibly important to the people that live in my district, and it's also incredibly important to me. I have a very special place in my heart for the Chicago Transit Authority. I spent a number of years working there myself, working side by side with the folks that go out and put service on the street every day. So I really have a deep connection to transit, and my goal here, particularly this year, before the end of the year, is trying to find a path forward in solving the immediate fiscal cliff, but also creating reform around the current transit system we have in Northeastern Illinois to make it a more connected, a more user-friendly system, and ultimately trying to connect all the different parts of the region and making it more regional instead of factional, which it kind of feels like it is today. How am I feeling right now about this pivotal moment? I would say my anxiety level is about up here. We're back in Springfield in a couple of weeks. And we've only got 6 days in our veto session. And my intention is to pass a reform and revenue package that addresses the transit fiscal cliff, not only in Northeastern Illinois, but also across the state. So it's a big project. I've been working on it for almost 5 years, and I'm really looking forward to getting it across the finish line.
Jacky Grimshaw at the Center for Neighborhood Technology, also a member of Elevated Steering Committee and co-chair of the Transportation Equity Network. And I feel right at home. I know Eva-Dina from the CTA before she was a state rep, and I know Nora from being fellow parishioners here in Hyde Park. And so, it's like all friendly territory up here for me. So I'm having a good time already. And how I'm feeling about the moment right now is that my nature is to be optimistic. So I want Eva-Dina's anxiety level to come down because I am convinced that we are going to be able to do it. That we have been working on this, as she said. As she said, for 5 years, leading up to where we are now, I was on the park committee that Eva-Dina and the legislature said had to be done in preparation for this moment. And so I feel that I have complete ownership, and I don't like to fail, so we're going to win.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nora Leerhsen, the acting president of the Chicago Transit Authority. I'm so happy to be here with you. A little bit about me. I've been at CTA for 11 years. I started there as an intern coming out of law school and worked in the safety department and compliance and in different roles there throughout the organization. And I love CTA. I'm on it every day. I live and breathe CTA. And I think I'm happy people are feeling optimistic on this panel because I do lean positive myself. I say that a lot throughout the day because although this is a challenging moment and an intimidating moment for our agencies in this region, certainly, there's also an incredible amount of opportunity here in terms of the passion and advocacy around public transit that's going on. And you can imagine that someone sitting in my seat sees this as somewhat of a dream. And I said that at a town hall we had earlier this week, and I was worried it sounded kind of too positive, but it's true. There's people talking about the value of transit in a way that is completely unprecedented. And I thank everyone for that. I thank everyone who came to our town halls. We just had our third one last night at Malcolm X College, really well attended, and a really fascinating, diverse crowd talking about what transit means to them, what it means to everyone in the city. And so the focus on the value of our systems is really beautiful right now. And what I want to do is get through this moment and carry all that we're learning about what people care about transit beyond into the next phase. So a lot of what we talk about here is about funding CTA not just to survive, but to thrive. And a lot of my focus has been on showing what CTA can do and restoring faith in CTA and its service so that people feel excited about where it can go. I keep saying that 90s Field of Dreams reference, if you build it, they will come, because I feel that every day too. We're adding service this year to our bus frequent network routes. We have 20 routes across the city getting 10-minute or better service all day, and the ridership follows. We just opened 4 new stations on the north side in the Red Purple Modernization Project, and ridership is taking off at those stations, and they're beautiful. So I have all these stories I can point to about when you invest in transit, the ridership takes off and you transform communities. So settings like this and all the events that we're having give a great opportunity to talk about that, and I'm really grateful for them.
Thank you. Some of us were born here in Chicago, and a lot of us, like myself, moved here. And the primary reason many of us, including myself, moved here is because of Chicago's public transportation system. And Jacky, I believe, is a longtime resident. She may have been born here. I don't know that much about her history, but she's certainly been involved with public transportation longer than me, and I can call her out because I'm 70. So tell us, Jacky, why public transportation is important and why it's important to empower our transit agencies to be more proactive, especially with regard to ETOD in cities like Chicago?
Well, the short answer you gave earlier, Robert, when you said transit is essential. I believe that, but I like to think about transit right now in respect to where we are as a society, as a community. And we look around and we know we have climate change, even though some people like to deny it. We also know that we have right now the beginning of an economic crunch. We also know that people, particularly in disadvantaged communities, and the Center for Neighborhood Technology, I mean, that's our audience. Our concentration and our programs are on low and moderate income communities. And so my remarks here are going to be from that point of view, because that's what I do every day and think about every day. But, we think about, what's happening with people's health, and also what's happening with the threat to people's health, their ability to get health care, their ability to afford health care, their ability to recover from health incidents. And we also look at what I started to say a minute ago and then got distracted, is that look at the job situation, right? That we have people in the communities on the south and west side with high unemployment. We get national news about the unemployment rate, but if you look in those communities, those numbers that you get nationally mean absolutely nothing. Minimally, you're talking about 48% unemployed, but more realistically, it gets closer to 50% in some of these communities in terms of employment. When we think about where is transit in a situation that we're currently in, you can see that transit is essential for those communities. And why do I say that? Transit provides access as well, accessibility as well as equity. Now, if you're sitting right here, this is my neighborhood, Hyde Park Woodlawn. We're very rich in terms of transit. You could get here by the Metro Electric, which is right to the right side of us, or you could get here by CTA, either directly on the buses that come to Stony Island, which is a block, 2 blocks away, or through transfer from the Green Line at Garfield or at 63rd Street. Here we're very fortunate, but a lot of places on the south and the west side, they don't have that kind of access. They may have one bus that goes through the community. And as Nora gets more and more frequent, they'll have more frequent buses coming through the communities. But, they have maybe one train line, maybe they're close to the pink line, or maybe close to the green line, or close to the blue line. But depending on where you are, those lines may be very distant from where you live. So, accessibility is extremely important for low and income communities. And what transit does is to provide them with the opportunity to access more opportunities. Transit provides the opportunity for people to access more opportunities. You like that? Mm-hmm. Double use of opportunities, but it's real. So, through transit, you have the opportunity to get to a job, to even apply for a job. If that transit is regular, you have the ability to keep that job. If it's infrequent or unreliable, then your ability to hold on to that job is endangered, right? The other thing that we can think about in terms of why transit is important in this environmental time is that more transit means less cars on the road. Nora talked about what's happening, building it, people are giving up their cars and riding transit. Well, the more transit accessibility we have, more and more people have the opportunity to get out of their cars. And what does that do? Lower greenhouse gases. It provides the opportunity to give us better air quality, gives people in those communities the ability to live without a lot of pollution in their lives. And that improves their quality of life, improves their length of life, right? Transit is essential from the point of view of equity and accessibility, from the point of view of economics, and from the point of view of environment. Now, why is COD important around this transit, right? And if you look at any place on the south and west side of Chicago, you will see communities that have lots of available land around the transit stations. You know, the transit stations, sometimes people don't feel comfortable going there because it's a wasteland around the transit stations. But if we can fill that in with more housing, which then provides more opportunity and affordability for housing in Chicago. We provide the opportunity for entrepreneurs. I don't know if you were here for the first panel, but you know, what they talked about is the ability to bring new development around the transit station. So what does that do? That provides people in those communities with more amenities, provides them with the opportunity to have access to the kind of things they need and they want. As a result of that, they have a better quality of life. So transit is essential. The ability to have transit-oriented development around those stations is essential for all of the environmental reasons and social economic reasons that I just named. And I could talk more, but I think I better shut up so we can get to the next person.
Well, thank you, Jacky. Very interesting comments there. We're going to switch over to Nora now and ask her about how is CTA thinking about supporting ETOD and what state legislation would be important to empower CTA to be more proactive with ETOD. And I'll put this caveat. You guys are just connecting places. You're not necessarily building the stuff, so.
Right, and I think, you know, the title of this panel, I'd say, first of all, our role in supporting ETOD is to be a really strong T in that, first of all. So to provide high quality, reliable, frequent transit service that serves people in a way that inspires and invites development around it. And we have been focused on that. We've also, over the past few years, we have engaged traditionally around our capital projects, our Red Purple Modernization Project and the Red Line Extension have more formal plans around transit-oriented development associated with them. And a lot of the reason the development has happened in that area is because of some legal constraints that I know are under consideration in the proposed legislation, whereby CTA, unlike other transit agencies internationally that have some opportunity for this, CTA and transit agencies can't acquire land unless it's for a direct transit purpose. And you can imagine that's constraining. And what it means is that most of the land we acquire that we can actively work as partners in developing is associated with our large capital projects. And that's fairly limited. You know, we're excited about that, but it would be fantastic if that could be broader. And so we've always been a proponent of that. What we're looking to do internally at CTA, and something that's going to come out in the 2026 budget, is that we're going to formally assign staff at CTA starting next year to work on ETOD work. And I'm excited to announce that here. This is the perfect audience to announce that to. Yay! Fairly straightforward concept, but I think you all know from the work that you do working with government agencies and different groups that how important it is to have a centralized place in an organization where you know that work is being done. And one of the reasons we're really excited to take that step is because of the advancements in the legislation that we're seeing proposed here, that it looks like our region is about to maybe take a really significant step in what it's able to do from a transit-oriented development perspective. And so this way, when we have dedicated staff working on that, we're going to be ready to engage in a proactive way more than we ever have before. And something you may know about our budget process currently, without funding identified, we are developing 3 different budgets. So everyone's very busy right now, but we're developing a budget if we get the money that we've asked for to sustain our current service, but also one that if we were able to expand, what we would be able to do, as well, of course, to prepare if we ever had to cut service, which we hope we never do. But in that expansion budget, in addition to identifying the staff in the as-is budget, I'm going to propose expanding the group to a whole office at CTA beyond that initial staff member. So I really am excited about where CTA is headed here. And I think the transit-oriented development concept really epitomizes so much about transit that doesn't necessarily come out in other stories. We hear at town halls a lot of people telling their personal story of the transit they rely on, and that's so hugely important. But also talking about those kind of cascading deep impacts that transit has on communities is actually harder to articulate than I think people may realize. We have numbers, we say for every dollar it's $13, but I'm always looking for deeper ways to explain that impact because it's so huge that you almost get at a loss for words as to explain it. And I think it's really important, and part of this discussion and formalizing that in the law is going to be so important. You know, there's that famous quote, if you change the law, you change people's hearts. And when I look at the TOD proposal there, I do see that there. You kind of formalize and force our region to recognize in that law how impactful transit is. So I'm excited about it.
Great, great. This next question is going to be a real doozy because they're asking me to ask Representative Delgado to share the contents of an 800-page bill. I don't think that's really possible. So we're going to ask her just to focus on how ETOD fits into the current reform effort. And she shared with you a bit of why transit is a priority for her, but maybe she can share a little bit of the top level stuff that's in that bill and not drag us through all 800 pages.
Well, I'm going to give a shout out to one of the staff members that's actually here with us. Jacky, wave to everybody. He actually probably could walk you through all 800 pages of the bill because he's been working on it at a pretty significant level. But I can talk a bit about the ETOD portions, particularly what came out of the Senate and what we're hoping to have in the House bill and ultimately have in the final product when we get there. So the House Bill 3438, which is actually the Senate's version of the bill, I know that's confusing, but that's how it works. It has a section in there that essentially removes some of those regulatory barriers that exist when creating a TOD project. And one of those big barriers is parking requirements. So it eliminates parking minimums. That in and of itself, I think makes, so forget about allowing the transit agency to do this kind of work. Developers love the idea of having to, or being able to develop buildings and multi-use, high density, I should say, developments, and not having to put an extraordinary amount of parking there when it's right next to a transit station. So whether it's next to a train, a CTA train, next to a metro train, or close to a major bus hub, it makes a lot of sense to do that. So that's one of the things that it does, eliminates parking minimums. The other thing it does is it tasks the new NETA board, NETA organization, Northern Illinois Transit Authority, with having this responsibility, actually being responsible for equitable transit development, much like what Nora is talking about developing at the CTA, right? So there is an actual charge to NETA to say, this is something that you should be doing, and here are all the tools you need to do it. And it includes this issue that Nora raised about being able to condemn property for a use other than transit, but it's transit related, it's transit adjacent, and it creates so many opportunities that currently don't exist. Now, so that's what the bill does. Can I tell you how much angst there is in suburban communities about this language? They're very concerned, and I think with very little reason, that this is somehow going to remove control and authority from them in their communities. And the way I look at it, and certainly based on the conversations I've had with some of these mayors, is that this is just enhancing what they're doing already. So most of these localities, particularly ones that have transit serving them, they are actively trying to develop around their train stations or their bus depots, but they're missing something. And I don't even think they realize what it is that they're missing. This legislation is going to fill in that gap. It's going to give them the opportunity to market to developers, to get those developers to come in. And when a developer may not be able to, it gives a transit authority the ability to go in and do some work jointly with them. This is all envisioned, from my perspective, to be a collaborative process, because that's just how community development should work. And I think all of you in this audience understand what that means. So that is what we're trying to accomplish with the legislation. I will tell you, again, because of all of that angst that we're hearing from suburban mayors, mostly what I'm trying to do is sit down and walk them through this. Give them the comfort so that they understand that this is a collaboration and this is something that they should be excited about, not necessarily worried about. So we're going to continue to work through that process. I think the Senate did a great job laying out a lot of these reforms and putting them on paper and giving folks a chance to really understand what the 800 pages of that bill means. And now we're able to really hone that language to make it super clear so that people know exactly what it is that the expectations are. And then also having accountability built into the bill so that we can make sure that the agencies are accomplishing the goals that we've set out for them.
Thank you. You know, when I'm on the Western bus, I am either on an express bus or the local bus during rush. You see all the cars lined up going north and south, and you say, why are they suffering all of that, stuck in traffic? So I believe we all have a role to play, even if you're going to continue to be a driver. And that's ironic to say, because next week is National Week Without Driving. But I think we all have a role to play in supporting public transportation. And I'm going to ask the panelists, what do we need to do and what sort of calls to action that they might offer us to consider?
In terms of?
Getting this bill across the finish line.
Oh, okay.
Getting 1.5 billion so we don't have ghost bus and goat trains.
You're not going to write a check, Robert?
It's full of rubber.
All right, so being an advocate, that's what I do. So, if you give a carpenter a hammer, what does he want to do? He wants to find a nail, right? So advocating for change in public policy has been my life's work for about the last 45 years. So, when I see things happen like the need to fill this fiscal cliff, and the legislature recognizes that need and they want to address the problem, then they will do their jobs, right? They know what they have to do. They have to write bills, they have to get their colleagues to go along with it and so forth. But they also need us. For the legislator to be successful, they need the people who are going to benefit from the work that they're doing to speak up and let their representatives know that this is something that they want, something they believe in, and something they're willing to pay for. I mean, I heard people at one of Nora's town halls say, I'm willing to pay double the fare if we keep transit. I mean, people, nobody likes paying taxes, right? We recognize that. But, you pay for what you get. Nothing in this life is free. So if we really want to save transit, and we really want to empower the members of the legislature to be successful, they need to hear from you. They need to hear from you. They need to hear from you by email, by phone call, by visit to their offices, by going to Springfield. And we have one of our environmental groups is sponsoring a trip to Springfield on October 15th. So if you really want to go, get on the website, go to Illinois Environmental Council and register to get on a bus. It's free. Your time is involved, and 4 hours down, 4 hours back, a couple hours at the Capitol. So you are giving up your day. So it's not totally free. But what you'll get out of that is the ability and the satisfaction to know when this fiscal cliff here hits and we have the money, that sacrifice of a day was a little bitty thing to keep transit going and expanding in this region. So I don't know if there'll give me time to give you all the things you need to do, but shorthand, you got to talk to Eva-Dina's colleagues, right? You got to talk to them. And you got to talk to folks, particularly in the suburbs. As you say, these suburban folks think that we're taking something away and we're trying to give them something. So if you have relatives, friends, acquaintances, coworkers that live in a neighborhood, that live in the suburban communities, you got to get them to do the same thing. Contact their legislators, for sure. And there's one other thing I want to emphasize. One of the legislators that I knew when we had the last fiscal cliff, so to speak, our last transit funding problem, she told me in relationship to getting people to respond, it's like you go in the kitchen and you see a cockroach. You say, oh my gosh, there's a cockroach, let me get rid of it. So you get rid of it. You come back in the kitchen the next day and you turn on the light and there's 2 cockroaches. You say, oh my gosh, what's happening? Let me get some spray going. You come in the kitchen a third time, there's 3 cockroaches. And you know what you start to think? There's a damn flood of cockroaches behind the wall, right? And she said it's the same thing with legislators. They can hear from one person, 2 people, 3 people, 3, 4, 5 people are saying the same thing. My, that must be a goddamn army behind them, right? So be the beginning of that army, right? You gotta do it. That's the only way we're gonna get this across the line.
Yeah. Yeah, I know CTA is, a service agency. They're not necessarily an advocacy agency. But one of the things I do is a role to play, and maybe you can expand upon this, is the hundreds of workers. And I always try to say thank you. I'm not always good about that. But that's at least a simple role many of us can play, is to make our CTA workers feel valuable.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Now, our workers are the best part of our agency. And I think I tell at our monthly we have graduations for employees that come either get promoted or first enter the agency. And I always talk to them about when you interact with someone and smile at them, you're making someone feel good about Chicago, about the world in general. It's an incredibly influential post to fill in someone's day. And they're incredible. So thank you for bringing that up. I think since you brought them up, I'd say, of course, a reminder, I think everybody knows this, but this is incredibly stressful for them. Mm-hmm. And to hear about this, and I'm being purposefully a bit quieter, to be honest, about scaring them so much internally and scaring the world. Again, I lean positive, but part of the reason I lean positive is I have a workforce where nearly half of the 11,000 people at CTA have under 2 years of service at CTA. This is a new workforce because we lost so many people in COVID, like transit agencies. So it's a fragile set, right? We want to keep them on. We want to keep them excited. And when I talk to them, they are worried. And so as much as we can keep the narrative hopeful and strong, that helps them. And I'd say, in addition to thanking the employees, I'd say keep riding. I would venture to guess this audience is riding, but I would say, keep riding even in trips you might not think to ride in, and tell people about it. And in terms of advocacy, just to piggyback off what Jacky's saying, nothing beats a personal story. I think sometimes there's a tendency to think you have to say something that sounds very academic or scientific about transit. Just tell your story and the story of the people you know and your family and how much they rely on transit. And that's really the most moving thing to share with someone. And, I think in addition to that, kind of as a contrast to that, but people in your positions, I are aware of kind of the international scene on these fronts and how our transit system compares to others. I think pointing that out to people is really important. You know, even the ETOD story, because people will say, I just came back from somewhere and their transit's so much better. Tell them why. Tell them the reason behind that. And that we're in a really exciting time to start steering us in a direction towards those systems. And it's because of proposed legislation around ETOD. It's because of funding levels. And so I think educating people on what you know about our comparisons to other cities and other countries is hugely impactful. And I also would say to celebrate CTA and transit in a joyful way. I spoke to the historian Nicholas Bloom. He's written a book on transit funding, and I wanted to talk to him just about transit funding in America. One of the first things he said to me was, transit gets funded in this country on positivity, on people celebrating the beauty of your systems. And he's based in New York, and he said, you have the most beautiful system. Just talk about it constantly. And I was like, you don't have to tell me twice. That's all I want to do. So it might sound kind of silly, but I'm just telling you, when he validated that for me, someone that's really studied this, that at the end of the day, when people have to take a revenue vote and say, let's do this, it's a joyful vote. It's a hopeful vote about where we can go. So leaning that way can have a great impact.
Yes, Representative, I'm sure you have an interesting story to tell about the roles we can play. What is it?
So I love sitting in this dais because it's like, these are my people, right? Everything that they have said, I was thinking the exact same thing, right? To piggyback on Nora's point about positivity, one of the things that was very difficult for me to hear last session in the spring when we were debating this and talking about this, were Chicago members who represent the city of Chicago, saying such terrible things about the CTA. Not in my chamber, but in the other chamber. So when you all are talking about transit, sharing your positive stories are really helpful. In addition to writing, I would challenge all of you to find a friend that lives in the suburbs and make them ride the system. Now, they don't necessarily have to ride CTA. You could jump out there and ride the Metro with them, ride the PACE system with them, but get them on the system. Most of them and most of my colleagues, and they'll admit this to you as well, they don't use transit very often, if they use it at all. And because of that, they may not be close enough to understand how it's essential. I think Robert made a great point. Transit is essential. We need it. Even if you don't use it, we need it, because the fact that people get onto the transit system makes the driving experience much, much better. One of the things that I noted here is that riding transit is good for my mental health. Today I had to drive because I have a few events that I'm trying to hop to, and so I'm in my car. And one of the things that I notice every time I get in my car is that people are so angry. They are angry because they are in congestion that back in 2008, Jacky, we used to talk about this as Carmageddon.
Yes.
And we're living in it now, right? And we as humans have the tendency to adapt. We're really good at that. And now we're starting to think that this is normal. It is not. So go out there and have that conversation with folks that you know that don't live in a transit-rich area so that they can understand why it's important. And then encourage them to reach out to their legislator and say, this is important. We really need you all to do something about this. And we encourage you to find that revenue to invest in the system. I try to use positive words like that. Don't love to talk about raising taxes, but I do like to talk about investing in systems that are going to give back, right? I think, Nora, you mentioned this, $1 equals 13. You invest $1 into transit and you get 13 back into the economy. I don't think you see that return on investment in a lot of things. I was at a town hall last weekend talking about transit. People were complaining about the cost of capital investment. And I asked them, do you have any idea how much a mile of the Kennedy Expressway costs? I bet you don't. We don't talk about that. What kind of investment do we get on highway infrastructure? I don't know. But we know transit, you get 13 bucks back for every dollar. This investment is so good, not just for Chicago, not just for the region, but for the state and also our neighboring states. So again, these things, I know that these guys here agree with me on all this. I have a feeling that you all probably agree as well, but that message needs to get out to other folks who may not be as educated and knowledgeable about what we know and why transit is such a big part of that. Again, this is like this has been my life for the past almost 5 years. I am so excited to get to the end point because once you see, well, let's start with this. Change is hard. There was once a politician that I worked for who said, people don't like the status quo, but people also don't like change. And that is one of the challenges we have. And so getting people to a point to trust that what we are doing with this transformative legislation is going to be better than what you have today. And you have to just trust me. I know right now, trust in government, not super high. But you have to trust that the people who have been working on this, the people who have been engaged in this transit conversation really care about making it better. And I mean, I wouldn't be doing this otherwise. I would go and do something else that helps my anxiety level come down, right? But I appreciate that all of you are here today, that you're all here to hear this conversation and to hear us talk about some of the things that we think are important. And you just need to be our amplifier and go out there and talk to people who maybe don't all agree with what we're saying and may need to have that conversation and that engagement in a good way, in a positive way.
Need to check with my timekeeper. Is this time for a little bit more back and forth, or do we need to move to open questions? All right. We
I
can.
love questions.
All right, we're opening it up for some questions from the floor. Try to be brief, keep it in a question, and please identify yourself if you feel comfortable in doing so. I'll take the gentleman.
There's a mic.
She's got a mic. Okay, then I won't point to anyone. I'll just rely on our aides here.
Hi, my name's Andy. I am an avid rider of buses and trains. And I remember back in the spring during the first iteration of the revenue generation campaign, there was a provision that would be a fee on Uber rides to help subsidize the fiscal cliff. And I was excited about that. I was like, oh, I'll pay $1 more in my Uber to subsidize my train rides. Like, that's great to be able to have like abundant transit. But then I got a notification from Uber that explained like, you know, this is harming Uber. It's going to be unaffordable to ride Ubers anymore. And if I didn't know about the bill, I would have been quite scared by that. I didn't understand the benefits. And so I'm wondering like how you're fighting back against like rhetoric like that from large companies, from people that are against this bill going into the next budget season.
Sure. So I would start by saying I've been having conversations with rideshare companies and trying to have an engagement with them about what they were so worried about, right? And I'll put it out there for all of you to know. One of the challenges that they see is that right now in Chicago, there's already rideshare fees. If we were to do what was proposed in the Senate version of this bill, Chicago would have the highest rideshare fees in the country. And there is a concern there that from their perspective, that there's going to be, the word that they used is break the model. They're worried that these fees are going to break the model. I am not in tech. I'm not totally sure I understand what that all means. But I think what I take away from that is, hey, there needs to be a way for us to streamline this so that you're not getting 5 different charges on your rideshare fee. Maybe it's just 2. And that way it's a little bit more manageable from their perspective. It's the same thing when we talk about the delivery fees. There was a big portion of the revenue that came out of the Senate bill was a $1.50 delivery fee on everything across the state. Had a lot of feedback on that from the companies that do that, right? And then Uber actually gets hit twice on this because they do Uber Eats, they do, and they do rideshare, right? So it's a little bit of both. So I think, number one, understanding where they're coming from and trying to get them to calm down a little bit about whether this is going to be like disastrous for their business model. But also, I think tying a nexus to why we're talking about that and talking about funding transit with that kind of funding, right? So I'm a big believer when we talk about revenue that it's got to have three things. The revenue has to be sustainable. I would like it to be connected in some way to transportation. And it needs to grow over time because the need of transit is going to continue. The cost of transit grows over time. Why? Because it's mostly people and fuel and healthcare. Am I right about that, Nora? Yeah. People are expensive. Healthcare is expensive, and fuel can be expensive, or electricity, depending on what we're talking about, right? So it's got to grow. So thinking about connecting and making a nexus from those revenue sources to what we're trying to accomplish, I think is really important. And having those conversations. What we don't have in the legislature is a built-in way to communicate to everybody who cares about this. And one of the things that Uber has, Lyft also has it, so does DoorDash, all of you who have those apps on your phones, they have a built-in way to communicate to you that's instantaneous. We don't have that. So all we can do is try to have these conversations in forums like this and try very hard to have earned media opportunities to talk about why we're doing it and giving really good guidance to members to be able to go back to their communities and talk about why they voted for something like this. What is the benefit to you? This is why I'm helping you as a legislator. This is my job in representing you, that kind of stuff. But it's not easy.
All right, thank you. Another question? One more.
I'll say less.
Thank you so much for being here today and sharing all of your work and wisdom. Louder?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. My name is Finnegan. I'm a master's in public policy student at U Chicago. I am at the school because I'm studying public finance and economic and infrastructure development. And listening to you talk about some of these questions or some of these comparisons that are helpful in talking to people about why these initiatives are important. What are other questions on your minds and from your experience that if you had the answer to would actually help convince other people even more?
Did you guys get that?
Yeah,
You want to
I
talk
could.
about myths and myth busting?
Yeah, myth busting. I mean, the first thing that just crossed my mind is also, because we've touched on comparing our current state to other agencies in the world, I think also looking at the history of the funding of our system is a key story to tell so that people understand how we got here and kind of the building up of inequitable funding that produces the services that you see. I'll be honest with you, when I bring it up, I think some people think I'm trying to fight with Metro and Pace. I'm not. I'm just talking about facts about funding. And we have to be able to do that. We have to be able to talk about that CTA has a much lower operating expense per ride than our peers. I mean, drastically lower. So when people see a difference in services, let's look at that. Let's look at the historical decisions that led to that. And then compare it to agencies around the world. So I was talking to people in Paris recently, and if you look at the tax in Paris that gives them tons of money to fund their transit, that decision was made in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. So, and that's just there, flowing, busting with cash, for decades. At least that's what it looks like to me. So, not only did I envy the money, I envied the decades that have passed since that decision was made. So we are asking people to make that decision right now. But I think the flip side is there's an appetite to talk about it. So when I talk about this moment and the opportunity there, this aligns with a lot of the sentiment politically in our cities, in our country, that we can talk about that this is the moment to correct those kinds of choices. And it's an incredibly exciting opportunity as well.
Can I just add on to that really quick? So I think the point here is really important, but I also want to call out the fact that we're not getting the kind of pushback that we got in 2008. So I'm gonna age myself and date myself here, right? Like I was around in the 2008 conversation. I was representing the city of Chicago at the time. People were like, "What's going on? How are the transit agencies blowing through so much money? There's got to be waste. There's got to be abuse. There's got to be fraud. Like this is crazy." But if you go back and look, in 1940 when the CTA was created, it was never funded properly to begin with, and it's like people didn't realize that. Oh well, the private companies folded, so let's give it to government because government's going to run it so much better, and never funded it, right? So I mean, there's a historical precedent for this. Today, I'm not hearing people say that. I'm not hearing people say, where is the waste? I mean, I am hearing people say, where are the efficiencies you can do? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's one thing, and it's fair. I think, anytime you're asking for something, you got to be able to show your math, show us what you've done so that we can say, okay, we trust you with more money, right? Like that's how that works. But nobody is saying today, I don't understand what's happening. It's very clear what's happening. COVID happened. Mm-hmm. But let's also be clear, COVID just made these things obvious. That underfunding was happening way before this, right? So, okay, I'll stop.
All right. Well, we're going to have to begin to wrap this up. I got a couple of things to share with you real quickly. One, there'll be time to interact. What?
Margaret.
Okay.
Do we have?
Yeah.
Do we have a moment or not?
Okay, we'll be fast.
So this is really a Northeast Illinois conversation. How do you talk to somebody who's representing the downstate communities who are saying probably this is of no interest to us? Why should we put money into it?
There's 50 downstate agencies. I might be a little bit off on my number, but more than you would think. Peoria, East St. Louis, Champaign-Urbana.
But they also have funding issues. Mm-hmm. We're asking for $1.7 billion, 1.5 for our Chicago region, and $200 million for downstate, so that they can fill some of their fiscal gaps and particularly their capital needs. So it is a statewide problem, and that's why we were looking at some of these fees going statewide.
I would also say one of the things that seems to be resonating with folks downstate is this idea of having regional rail, and in some cases high-speed rail. And so connecting population centers, whether it's Chicago or Peoria or Champaign or East St. Louis, like this is something that we need to also build up as well. But also we can't just run a train there and then they get stuck there and there's no way to get around, right? Springfield is very much like that. It's part of the reason why many members don't take the Amtrak down there, because once you're there, there's just no way to get around. The bus system does not run every 10 minutes like the CTA does, right? So that's part of the conversation as well. This solution is going to be a statewide solution. While we are feeling it acutely in Northeastern Illinois, they are seeing it across the state and across the country, by the way.
Right. So when this panel breaks up, there'll be a 10-minute break, and there'll be an opportunity. I know folks like to rush the stage and engage these wonderful colleagues, but we'll have to do that outside so they can prepare for the next panel. There's an advocacy table outside in the little garden area with all the tables. But before we end, I just want to say thank you for your thoughtfulness, audience, and attention. And let's give our panelists a round of applause and thank you.
Just, hi everyone, Juan Sebastian Arias. Just one note to our panelists. We do want to give you a little gift. that also showcases art and culture, which is a core part of how Elevate Chicago likes to show up in the world too. So we have a gift for you all. Everyone, please give them a second to go outside and go to the transit advocacy table where you can meet them. But thank you again.
Thank you so much.